Headlines this hour. The EFF has rejected the ANC's proposal of a government of national unity if it includes the DA and the Freedom Front Plus. Relief operations for people trapped by raging rivers in the Little Karoo region of the Western Cape continue. And President Cyril Ramaphosa says the Eastern Cape floods, which followed heavy rains, have caused damage amounting to about 6 billion rand. It's Saturday, and at midday it is time for Week in Review. Good afternoon from our studio in Johannesburg, and thank you so much for joining us on this rather cold day across the country. I am Gustav Freiling, and we invite you to be part of the show. You can give us a call on our studio number. It's 011 714 0680, 0681 and 0682. That's during the course of the next 2 hours to give your comments on our stories. President Cyril Ramaphosa has assessed government's response to the devastating floods in the Eastern Cape. He says the floods, which followed heavy rains, have caused damage amounting to about 6 billion rand. Government has classified the situation in the province as a national disaster in a bid to fast-track relief efforts.
The raging floods have left a trail of destruction in infrastructure in the two metros of the Eastern Cape. Kariga, outside Gqeberha, was the hardest hit place, especially in low-lying areas. A total of 11 people lost their lives. Addressing the victims, President Cyril Ramaphosa promised the social welfare departments will assist with burials. Ramaphosa gave government officials 30 days to provide temporary structures for those that were left destitute by the floods.
Make interventions to help them. The Minister of Human Settlements is already started. They are already taking care of accommodating people on a temporary basis, as well as putting up structures on pieces of land that we've identified here to accommodate people. So work is underway. Our disaster response is getting better and better. And I have said that we need to get even much better.
It was a day of mixed emotions for the victims.
They neglected us. They neglected us. They didn't even pay attention. Only Lapland people. No blankets, no nothing.
See, no, my sister's house is moving at the outside. And I'm looking around for the key. I struggle to find the key. And I try to break it open and coming out. And I go to go rescue them, you see. Out of the window, the small boy, get him out of the window, my sister also, and I put him on a safe place.
The Nelson Mandela Metro Municipality has written to Treasury requesting over 150 million rand to assist the victims.
We've got a plan now from the Department of Water and Sanitation to show exactly where the flood line is and the floodplains are, and they will definitely have to be relocated. So I'm in contact with the Minister of Human Settlements, and we will be relocating them within the next 48 hours.
The President says he will be back to assess the progress made in assisting the victims. Dombozuko Palindulo, SABC News, Kariga.
Now, the ANC-NEC has committed to pursue the formation of a government of national unity. The decision was revealed by party president Cyril Ramaphosa, and it came after a marathon meeting in Boksburg in Gauteng this week. The party's highest decision-making body met to chart the way forward after the organization failed to secure a majority vote after last week's election.
We have already held constructive discussions with a number of parties. The Economic Freedom Fighters, the Inkatha Freedom Party, the Democratic Alliance, the National Freedom Party, the Patriotic Alliance. We've also engaged our alliance partners to brief them on the process and will continue to seek their invaluable views and guidance. The ANC has entered these discussions with an open mind and a commitment to speak to all parties that have a stated intention to advance the interests of the people of South Africa. As the NEC, we have already agreed in April 2023 on certain principles that should guide our approach to collaborating with other parties in coalitions. The principles we will collaborate with other parties are based on advancing the building of a united, democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and prosperous nation. We further said that any such agreement of working with others must be based on a common minimum program that focuses on measurable targets for economic growth and inclusion, on service delivery and development. All parties must commit to shared values, nation building, and social cohesion. Now, these values include respect for the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and the rule of law, social justice and equity, human dignity, non-racialism, and non-sexism. These values also include stability, accountability, transparency, integrity, community participation, and good governance. Agreements between parties who will be involved in this whole process should, in the end, be in writing. They should be public. They should also be transparent and include measures for holding all participants accountable.
Now, the EFF has rejected the ANC's proposal of a government of national unity if it includes the DA and the Freedom Front Plus. Julius Malema's Red Berets say they don't want to repeat the government of national unity of 1994. And on the other hand, the IFP has committed to further engaging with the ANC and other parties on the formation of a government.
We have already held constructive discussions with a number of parties: the Economic Freedom Fighters, the Inkatha Freedom Party, the Democratic Alliance, the National Freedom Party, the Patriotic Alliance. We've also engaged our alliance partners to brief them on the process and will continue to seek their invaluable views and guidance. The ANC has entered these discussions with an open mind and a commitment to speak to all parties that have a stated intention to advance the interests of the people of South Africa.
The ANC has decided to remain central and not to choose any of the left or right-leaning ideological parties for the formation of a coalition. A government of national unity is the proposal on the table, but there is a bone of contention on the part of the DA and the MK party. The EFF says they want no part in a government that has the DA and Freedom Front Plus.
We are opposed to the government of national unity in as far as it resembles what was concocted in 1994. So if you were to check the outcomes of that government of national unity of Nelson Mandela, it had F.W. de Klerk as an executive deputy president. It had Piet Botha as a minister of mineral resources and energy. It had Andre van Niekerk as the minister of land and agriculture. It had some mayor from the National Party as Minister of the Environmental Affairs and Water Affairs. And even he had in social development a minister which came from the apartheid establishment. We do not want to form any part of a government with representatives of the white colonial and apartheid system.
The DA has welcomed the NEC's decision of a formation of a government of national unity, but the party is on the record on their refusal to work with the EFF or any other party that doesn't respect the constitution.
The Democratic Alliance welcomes the fact that negotiations can now proceed into a more substantial phase. Our negotiating team will now embark on a series of further meetings with other parties to establish what their reviews and reactions are to this proposed government of national unity that was announced yesterday by President Ramaphosa. In our upcoming meetings with the ANC, we will also seek further details on what the proposed government of national unity is and how they see it working. In terms of our own internal processes, the Democratic Alliance Federal Executive will then have an engagement on that. And on Monday, the DS Federal Council will be meeting to have further deliberations on this as part of the broader internal process of consultation. We, however, remain committed to the process of trying to find stability for our country.
The IFP has also shown interest in engaging further with the ANC on the formation of the new government.
At our meeting with the ANC on Sunday, 2 June 2024, 3 scenarios were presented: inter alia, a grand coalition, government of national unity, and a minority government. It is abundantly clear that difficult choices and political considerations of material consequences for the country are upon us. Accordingly, the IFP coalition's task team resolved that the ANC must be given space and time to apply its mind and consult further. In light of the announcement made by the ANC last night pronouncing a government of national unity as its preferred option, the IFP coalition's task team will now engage with the ANC and other parties further and report back to the IFP NEC on Monday, 10 June 2024.
The EFF has also called on parties to allow the MK party to get their first preference to form government in KwaZulu-Natal, as they are the majority party in the legislature. Samkele Masego, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo is yet to announce the date of the first sitting of the National Assembly following the general elections. The IEC officially handed over the lists of MPs and provincial legislatures to Zondo, who in turn handed them over to the Secretary of Parliament, Olile George.
The IEC's handover of the lists of elected representatives paves the way for the swearing-in of members of provincial legislatures, members of the National Assembly, and more importantly, the election of a president who will preside over a government of unity in a changing political landscape. The Chief Justice, however, has not yet committed to a date.
Let me take this opportunity to also thank the IEC for being able to prepare this list so soon after the announcement of the results. I think that that's very important. And as I've said, now that that step has taken place, then the announcement of the date for the first sitting of Parliament will be the next step. That, as you know, will be announced by the Chief Justice, and I think it's going to happen pretty soon. I'm not going to say it's going to be this afternoon. I'm not going to say it's going to be tomorrow, but it's going to be pretty soon.
The said list comprises of 174 women and 226 men, translating to 56.5% of the elected representatives being men, while 43.5% are women, a slight decline for the latter.
They range from 20 to 79 in age. That breakdown is as follows. 12 candidates are in the age cohort 20 to 29. 67 are 30 to 39. 110 are between 40 and 49. 110 again are 50 to 59. 90 are 60 to 69. And 11 are 70 and above.
The lists were handed over to the Secretary of Parliament, who highlighted to the nation the significant milestone being marked on our democratic journey and the responsibility that will accompany this task.
Your decisions have determined who will represent you in Parliament, and it is now our responsibility to ensure that the new Parliament carries your aspirations and hopes for a better future.
Meanwhile, coalition talks continue to take place as political parties have 14 days since the declaration of the results to take their seats. Kenny Mapanga, SABC News, Johannesburg.
This is Week in Review on the SABC News Channel, and we will be back right after this. Welcome back. This is Week in Review on the SABC News Channel. Right, India's Narendra Modi will be sworn in for a historic third term this weekend, but Modi's win has come with an aura of defeat. He lost his party's parliamentary majority for the first time in a decade, and the election saw a resurgent opposition weaken Modi's hold on Indian politics. But we will go back to that story later in this hour. In the meantime, we are joined live now this afternoon by Mr. Rolf Meyer. Now, the outcome of the 2024 national election ended 30 years of electoral supremacy by the African National Congress. The ANC garnered 40.2%, followed by the DA's 21.8%. The MK party came in with 14.6% of the votes. Now, coalition talks have been the order of the day for the past week, and although the ANC scored the largest share of any party, they now need to choose a partner with whom to govern, leaving South Africa on unfamiliar ground. Over the past 4 electoral cycles, the ANC's share of the vote gradually declined, but never by more than 5 percentage points from one election to the next. Today, we have a look at what a coalition government is and what the processes are to ensure a successfully run coalition government. To unpack this, we are joined now by Rolf Meyer, who is a former politician as well as a conflict advisor. Mr. Meyer, good afternoon, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Firstly, where do you think South Africa is heading to in terms of a formation of a government, or according to your experience, having been involved in the past in the formation of the government of national unity, what would be right for this country under these circumstances?
You are absolutely right when you say it's uncertain territory. We haven't been in this kind of position before. Simply because we can't compare really what is now happening with what we established in 1994 with the Government of National Unity. It was then a matter of providing for a government that could see after the transition from apartheid to democracy. There was an agreement about that. We had ample time to actually negotiate the content of that structure. And it was contained in the interim constitution of 1994, which preceded the election of President Mandela as the first democratic president. So circumstances, of course, therefore differ largely from what we had at that time. But I think certain experiences can be taken on board. The first is that, parties have to accept that they have to work together in the interest of the country. There is a party that has the majority of votes, not more than 50%, but at least that party should take the lead. And then other parties who are willing to participate must find an agreement with the leading party on the basis of which the country can be governed. I think President Ramaphosa on Thursday evening in his statement made it very clear what the proposal is from the ANC side. And personally, I think that is the best route. In other words, a form of government of national unity, not similar to the one that we had in 1994, but something like that can be inclusive. And that is why I would support this notion of the government of national unity as put forward by President Ramaphosa, because it's providing for the most inclusive possible type of government that we can have.
So take us through what it means to have a coalition-run government. The parties are currently making a distinction between government of national unity and a coalition. How do you understand the difference?
I think a coalition is where 2 or more parties come together and make an agreement and say, okay, now we're going to run the country excluding others. Government of national unity is more inclusive, where you, like the president did, invited all parties to come forward and say if they would like to participate, and it's therefore a more inclusive type of government that you have. Coalition is more exclusive in the sense that it's an agreement based, or it's based on an agreement between 2 or more parties.
There is also talk of a confidence and supply agreement. We've seen it used in other countries. What would that entail if it comes down to that in the end, and is that workable?
I think that was the third option that was under discussion during the past week. If I can just categorize, and again, it's the government of national unity, the coalition type of agreement, and then the supply and consensus style, which is, if my understanding is correct, a model that is being utilized in Canada and I think Turkey with the references. I'm not directly exposed to that kind of experience in any other case, and I would be a little bit hesitant myself in terms of going that route for the simple reason that I think it depends very much on the capacity of the state to deliver. In other words, the functionaries of the state, government departments, etc., to deliver services, etc., irrespective of who's in government almost. Because it would mean a minority government that will be under threat all the time at the political level, in parliament, etc., where it could be facing motions of no confidence on an ongoing basis because it would not have majority support in parliament. And I think that type of arrangement would, in the South African case, be not only very new, but also maybe being challenged all the time to the extent that we will not see proper and stable government.
Let's bring it back to our own experience of coalitions here in South Africa. There have been a few coalitions at provincial and at municipal level, but most of these were quite unstable. Do you foresee success with a fully coalition-run government at the national level?
Well, we don't have much of a choice because there's no majority party. So a form of coalition government, either then through a government of national unity, with the coalition agreement type that I explained, will have to come into being. And, you know, we have just over a week left for parties to come to an agreement about what is the exact arrangement that they would find acceptable. Firstly, to elect the president. When Parliament comes together for the first time, which has to be not later than the 18th of June, they will be sworn in, the members of the National Assembly, and then they have to elect the president. So that means there will have to be an agreement to the extent that a majority can vote for one person to become president of the country. Otherwise, we have a period of further instability. Once the president is elected, of course, I think there will be a bit more time to look at the exact structure of the government that is to be formed. In other words, the formation of the cabinet, etc. And I think that will give a bit of time. This is new to us, completely new. But we must also remember that some of the circumstances prevail in other countries. There were countries in Europe, for instance, in the last year or more, where I think they were without a solid government arrangement for more than 18 months. So this kind of thing happens, and it's now our first experience of this kind, and maybe we will find it hard to see one party having majority support in the foreseeable future. So coalition type of government is the order of the day, probably for quite a period into the future.
Mr. Mayor, we have a caller on the line. It's Lucas from Sebokeng, and he has a question for us. Lucas, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Gustav. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. What is your question?
No, it's not a question. It's a comment.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, that in this situation, it is true that it has been silent on the issue of where there is no outright winner, you know, and that has put us in a serious, as a country, in a serious quagmire, because every political party has got its own policy positions, which it may not want to be compromised, you know.
Yep.
So my view, the possible way forward, in my view, is the ANC-MK party coalition, you know, because if the MK agrees to go with the ANC, they will have 54%, if I'm not mistaken, with the MK party having 14%. So they will govern. And they are very close in terms of policy positions. It's just the issue of internal personal, differences which should be put aside in this situation, so that we can have a government which will lead, unless we are going to find it difficult, then we can easily go to re-election if the Constitution allows.
Lucas, thank you so much for that comment. I'm going to ask Mr. Mayor about exactly that, the ideological differences between all of these parties in a government of national unity from the entire spectrum of politics. Is what he's saying making sense, that it's easier to govern from one ideology?
It should be, and I think what we have experienced over the last 30 years during the 6 administrations that we've so far had, is that it was fairly easy for the ANC to govern because it was the majority party with quite a significant majority, and therefore could follow its own policies and ideologies. When it comes to coalition, however, it's sometimes necessary to make compromises, and I think this is a test for parties to be willing to do so. The problem with the MK is that they have declared in their manifesto that they reject the Constitution altogether, that they want to actually scrap it. And I think that makes it very difficult for the ANC, because the ANC itself has been part of the Constitution-making process 30 years ago. It subscribes to the Constitution. The President said it again very clearly, that the fundamental departure point for any new government formation is the Constitution. And if MK doesn't support the Constitution, I can hardly see how it's possible to work with them.
And they're also asking for the removal of Cyril Ramaphosa in that sense. I want to ask you about your own government of national unity. 1994, it didn't last until the end. Your party, the National Party, pulled out of that government. Your leader at the time, F.W. de Klerk, felt that he could not sit on both of those chairs, the deputy president and the opposition leader. Can you tell us why did that government not work? Why did the NP pull out, and what can we learn from that situation?
Well, let me just recap. The Government of National Unity, as it was formed in the first democratic government of President Mandela, was a prescription of the interim constitution. It would have lasted for 5 years, according to the interim constitution. But then Mr. de Klerk decided after 2 years to pull out, to withdraw. It was a decision very much taken by him. The rest of us who were in that Government of National Unity as ministers did not necessarily agree with that view, because we thought it was actually working quite well. Mr. de Klerk had his reasons, more from a political perspective, and he pulled the National Party out of that arrangement. Personally, I would have thought that, we should have continued, and we could have even probably proceeded with that arrangement after the 5 years on a voluntary basis. I think that was very much the expectation of many South Africans at the time. So the shortcomings that were hinted at as a part of the decision to withdraw, in my view, was not sufficient and strong enough to pull out. I think the positive lesson that we had from that is that we had an arrangement between the ANC and the National Party and the IFP, who were part of that government, that actually worked quite well. I can recall how it was possible for me, as the Minister of Constitutional Affairs in that government, to engage with President Mandela on more than one occasion to seek his guidance and actually helping me to find the best solutions in implementing the Constitution, which was part of my job at that point of time. So I think that the lesson that we can learn is it is possible to form a consensus government, which is essentially a government of national unity. Of course, there are certain things that you don't agree on. When I say consensus government, it doesn't mean you agree on 100% everything amongst yourselves as different parties. There are diverse opinions, and I think one has to respect that, and you must make space for that. Yes. But at the same time, the national interest prevails, and that should be taking the highest priority.
Mr. Mayor, we have another caller on the line. His name is Victor and he's from Tshwane. Victor, good afternoon and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. What is your question or your comment?
My question and or comment is, Mr. Rolf Meyer, by the way, you are a lawyer by profession and you participated in the establishment and the drafting and as well as the writing of the current constitution of 1996, emanating from the constitution of 1993. And I take it as a lawyer by profession. You'll agree with me when I say the interim constitution and the current constitution is not cast in stone and it can be amended anytime, any minute. Am I right or correct to say that? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, your comment there, is it correct to amend the Constitution?
It is possible to amend the Constitution with a two-thirds majority of Parliament. Under certain circumstances, the majority has to be 75%. But it is possible to amend the Constitution. The question is, should we? and should it be amended? Personally, I don't think that is something that one should look at on a too often basis. And I think there are certain fundamentals that rather should not be touched. The parting point is our Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And that is actually the foundation of our being as a nation. And the whole departure point that we find in Chapter 1 of the Constitution, I think gives the essence of why we are together as a nation, and that should rather not be touched. But elements of the Constitution have already been amended. If I remember correctly, modern amendments already have been passed by Parliament at different stages of during the last 30 years. So it is possible to amend it. But those amendments that happened, I think, were more of one can describe technical when required from time to time.
Just lastly, quickly, your crystal ball, what is it telling you? Are you going to make a prediction on what's going to happen?
I think at this point it's very difficult. Like one of the callers said, that it's going to be hard to exclude those that were not initially indicating that they are prepared to participate in the government of national unity. And I think the question is, where can you draw a line if necessary? At the moment, the parties that have indicated that they are not willing to participate in the government of national unity represent more or less 25% of the vote that was casted. And so one can argue that the other 75% are willing to participate in the government of national unity, or at least most of those. And I think this is where the contestation for the next week comes in, where the decision will have to be made who is going to be prepared to participate, and how is it going to work, in the sense that are we prepared to proceed at the exclusion of some parties or not? And I think that is the key that will have to be resolved by the leading party, and that's the ANC.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon. That was former politician and conflict advisor Rolf Meyer talking to us about what a coalition-run government in South Africa could then entail. Right, moving along, weakness in the local economy persisted in the first quarter. Stats SA data shows gross domestic product, which measures the value of goods and services produced by the economy, contracted by 0.1% in the first 3 months of this year. Now, goods-producing sectors of the economy contributed to the negativity, which is indicative of the impact of load shedding and lower demand at the beginning of the year.
The local economy shrank in the first quarter of the year. The negativity was broad-based, with 6 out of 10 sectors recording a contraction. The manufacturing sector contracted by 1.4%, with 5 of the 10 manufacturing divisions reporting negative growth rates in the quarter. The mining sector also contracted, with subdued economic activity reported for platinum group metals, coal and gold. The construction industry also fell as a result of decreases reported for residential buildings and construction works. However, the agriculture sector increased significantly on the back of improved economic activity reported for horticulture products.
When you look at utilities, largely electricity in the first quarter, we still had load shedding. Electricity was the driver that drove the manufacturing, as well as your mining. Mining depends heavily on electricity. So mining went in the negative and contributed also in the negative. And so is construction. We saw a positive growth from agriculture.
Household consumption expenditure declined by 0.3%, with decreases reported for durable goods, semi-durable goods and services, pointing to financial pressures facing households due to the high cost of living.
It's also a pretty bad picture on the consumption side of the economy. I mean, the weakness mainly came from weak consumer spending. If you recall, consumer spending accounts for around 60% of the economy. And that contraction that we see reflects the weakness across the board. I mean, if you recall, in the first quarter, we had inflation still remaining high at around more than 5.5%. And again, because of the slow growth in income, if you combine that with the impact of high interest rates and weak job market, that affects consumer confidence, and as a result, consumers were very cautious about spending.
Going forward, it's expected the economy will rebound in the second quarter as a result of the consistent electricity supply during that period. Growth for this year is forecasted at around 1% as the economy continues to battle structural constraints.
The growth projections for the year as a whole for this year. So we are currently sitting at around 1.2% for the year, indicating a lift from 0.6% last year. But I think that the risk to that 1.2% is on the downside now, particularly given that the rebound that we are penciling for the second quarter is likely going to be limited. As I have said, manufacturing PMI was weak, new vehicle sales were weak, and later this week we'll see the electricity production for the month of April, which will also give us indications of what is likely going to play out. So growth could be actually around 1%, 1.2%, or even 0.9% for the year. But the point is that it's growing, although it's not enough to lift living standard or boost living standard. As far as what this data means for the labor market, obviously it's not positive for the labor market. We would like to see more growth.
Gross fixed capital formation, which represents investments, contracted by 1.8% in the first quarter of this year. Stats SA says the negativity started in the third quarter of last year as businesses held off investments ahead of last week's elections. Loras Fakomusi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, the rand gained as much as 1% to the dollar as markets warmed to the idea of South Africa forming a government of national unity. The ANC, whose support fell to 40% in the recent elections, has opted to work with opposition parties, foregoing forming coalitions with any of its erstwhile political rivals. We are joined this afternoon now by PwC senior economist Kanti Pai. Good afternoon and thank you so much for being with us.
It's very good to be with you this afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers.
So the rand making a slight recovery amidst the political uncertainty, while the GDP figures that came through showed there was a contraction in the economy due to investor jitters. What does all of this mean?
Well, I think it's important to be very careful when we read anything into the rand, because some of the movements we see in the rand don't necessarily reflect the South African economy, but because obviously we are connected to other currencies such as the US, so you may see, for example, US weakness given some of the issues around inflation there and interest rates, and the dollar that has not particularly been strong. But certainly there is a sense that people are starting to get a little bit more comfortable with the discussions that have been emerging around our political risk, because that has been a very, very big thing since the elections, around where we are actually going to be going politically, which of course will inform the economic policies that will emerge post this period.
So is the market speculative because of the manner in which our elections have been ran, or because of the great unknown about a government without the ANC in the majority?
There's a great many factors that are unknown. This week, the Reserve Bank also released their financial stability report. And in that report, they really highlight what are the key issues that they have been looking at that actually may affect the stability of our financial system. That, of course, speaks to banks and other institutions that help us actually run the economy, that actually are influential in terms of financing the economy and making sure that we're actually growing ahead. And that is part of course, part of the mandate of the Reserve Bank to look also at a stable economy over a period of time so that we can create jobs and we can grow the economy. And so in some of those things, much of the emphasis has been on South Africa's debt, on South Africa's fiscal policy. Those two, of course, go together, right? Because if you manage fiscal policy, you are in a better position to manage debt. And then, of course, some of the other issues that are systemic to our economy, such as the structural reforms and all of those risks. And it seems to suggest that, South Africa still looks resilient if we think about some of the risks that we're facing. And so all of these things coming together this week are suggesting that, there is still some resilience in the South African economy, and so some space for comfort. So you may have seen that many of the market participants, having read that report, are a little bit more comfortable that, the economy, despite the uncertainty that has been raised by our political developments, that there is still very much resilience in terms of the shocks that we probably still can expect, because we really still don't know what the political outcomes will be, and those may actually enforce some shocks into the system.
What makes traders on edge about the various political parties who contested the poll? Because their economic policy proposals have been in the public domain for quite some time.
Those are important, I think, because it's one thing to see the economic proposals. It's quite another to see them almost maybe coming to fruition. Because the one thing that all of us expected, I think one of the things that the Financial Stability Report is based on is that what are the things that we think, they look at and they think these are outcomes that, yes, they are possible, but their probabilities are high, that we could actually envision them in a sense that they are reasonably possible. So we could actually see them, because we want to look at the system and say, what are the things that we think could actually happen? And for the most part, very few people expected the kind of outcome that we've seen from the election, especially with the ANC dropping the manner that they have. And so if you look at that, and then you look at the kind of policy outlook they've started to see, because we all know these things have been discussed about what are the right kinds of policies that allow South Africa to be a stable economy, to have, stabilize its debt, make sure that we are spending on the right things, make sure that we are doing the right kinds of reforms, both in the public sector and making sure that also in terms of infrastructure spending, and also that we are able to attract the kind of investment that we need to attract to be able to be a growing economy. So all of those things are things that we know very well, and those are the things that we've been wanting. The question now is whether or not the political enterprise is able to deliver those things. And that's really the nervousness that we're dealing with now, is that are we looking at a situation that if we have a formation of a government, whether that government will be able to deliver on the many things that I think many South Africans, including many others, have actually wanted to do, including inflation and some of the work that has to be done in making sure that South Africa is a much more equal society, because also that has a very important impact on our stability as a nation.
But let's talk about bonds now. South Africa's benchmark 2030 government bond was stronger in early trade yesterday, with the yield down 12 basis points, that's at 10.61%. When the credit ratings agencies and the investors look at the economy as a whole, how do the yield on the bonds help them signal things?
The yield really actually reflects, of course, the risk that is intrinsic in the South African economy, our ability to pay, and the risk that, because these are long-term bonds, so basically, what are the things that can change both in the immediate term and in the longer term? The longer the bond is, obviously, the more riskier it is, because there's a lot of things that could happen between now and the time that that bond is repaid. The kind of conversation that, has been brought on by the president and the ANC around this idea of a government of national unity probably brings a little bit of comfort, because it suggests that, everybody is coming to the table, perhaps that, South Africans very, very much love this idea of consensus, of working together. And I think it's very been a big decider over the past few years as we faced, for example, many shocks in the economy. We know that many of the shocks that we faced have come through, including COVID, that South Africans worked together to resolve these critical issues. And so it might be very attractive, this idea of a government of national unity, because it represents that part of South Africans where they tend to work together to resolve issues, and that is sort of a comforting feature of many South Africans. As I said earlier, much of our economy is exposed to the government. Much of the banks, their debt is exposed to the government in terms of their investment. So the exposure to government debt is a huge thing. And so what government policies will be in terms of fiscal policy, spending, saving, infrastructure reforms, all of those things are critical if everybody's looking at South Africa's future. And perhaps this government of national unity, as suggested, is probably bringing a little bit more comfort into many investors, because they start to think about the positive outcomes that South Africans tend to achieve when they work together.
Okay, we have a caller on the line at the moment. It's Kagiso in Northwest. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I just want to pose a question to your economy today, that if Ramaphosa can be removed from power, that the economy can be in danger. I just want to check from that, because some within the ANC believe that Ramaphosa is pushing neoliberal policies. If ever, indeed, the ANC comes to a conclusion to remove him, that thing on its own will affect the economy of South Africa. Thanks very much.
Mr. Pai, do you want to comment on that?
I'd love to hear that. I don't know if you could repeat
it was a bit difficult to hear. Is the caller still there, Kagiso? No, we lost the caller. It was very difficult to hear him, but he wanted you to comment on the policy changes and the ideological differences between the party and the way forward then for the economy.
That's very important. I think, again, the main thing, as we know, that South Africans as investors, both local investors and international investors, and when we talk about investors, we're not just talking about these big corporations. We also talk about South Africans who have their savings in the South African economy. So who have their savings, for example, in South African government debt, we're just mentioning now the different bonds. So everybody is looking at that and saying, what kind of, the ideology informs policy, and what kind of policies are going to come through, and how do they fare in terms of their government's ability, for example, to pay back the debt that is owed to savers, to South Africans, to their pension funds, and to the various instruments that South Africans use to save, which include government debt, which we know is very high. So it is important what policies a new government will pursue, and whichever way that government is constructed. And it is reasonable for many people, whether you are an investor, whether you are a saver, to be concerned about what policies may come on board with the new government, because that reflects really the outlook and the risk that you are bearing on your investment in the government, on your lending to the government, and certainly on the outlook and the outcomes of economic growth and employment creation, which all affects all of us.
Thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon on Week in Review. That was PwC senior economist Nganti Pai joining us here today. Now, independent candidates struggled to make a significant impact in last month's election, despite hopes for a shake-up of the political landscape. About 10 independent candidates in the country garnered a combined total of less than 20,000 votes. For more on the factors behind this outcome, we are now joined in studio by legal and development practitioner Karabo Mokhanyane. Karabo, good afternoon. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us here today. So can you tell us, basically, what could have contributed to the poor performance of these independent candidates?
Good afternoon, Gustav, and good afternoon to your viewers. Thank you so much for having me. So, like you said, there are about 10 to 15, and the list kept on changing until towards the end of it, that contested for the national and provincial elections. I think due to several reasons. The first one is that this was a test run. So this is the first time that we're seeing independent candidates actually contest for national and provincial. So it has never been done before. So for us to expect, a really big performance, it would be quite, unreasonable. But also, a change in the Electoral Amendment Act was not accompanied by a change in the ecosystem. So we still have an electoral system that is heavily, political party orientated. So even just in the minds of voters, we're still thinking political parties. We're not thinking independent candidates need to be considered. But there's also an extra layer of limited resources. So you have individuals who are competing against political parties that are well established, well structured, well-resourced and financed, and you expect individuals to actually contest at the same level with them, the odds are highly against them. But also, a lot of political parties have very much like policy platforms that enable them to address several issues. Independent candidates will choose one or two issues, and it's not guaranteed that voters are going to resonate. So, Analemda, her positioning was gender equality and corruption. If I can't resonate with those issues, I'm definitely not going to be voting for them. But also, and this one is arguable, it really matters who you are. In the eyes of voters, we need to know who you are in order to vote for you. And unfortunately, even just the limited media coverage, the limited incorporation in political debates means that we're not really exposed to who these people are. So it could be limited to family, friends, and the few people that know them that will truly vote for them.
So are these independent candidates are the voters just not attracted to them on the national level because they maybe feel they can't make a difference there?
Absolutely. So, people still trust political parties because of the structures and the well-established resources that they have to push for policy dynamics when they get into government. So entrusting an individual to push an entire agenda at a national level is quite a big mission. And I don't think we've built that kind of trust to have individuals push for such heavy related issues like corruption, load shedding, illegal immigrants. Those are big issues that I'm not really sure that people have confidence that an individual can push at a policy level.
So what can these independent candidates do? What kind of advice can you give them for future elections to have a stronger foundation for their campaigns then?
Sure. So I think we'd have to first start with really changing the system in itself. So, like I said, having the Electoral Amendment Act was not enough. The IEC needs to take a further step of actually creating an enabling environment for independent candidates to compete successfully against political parties. So one aspect is definitely voter education. We do need to have a mindset shift in the minds of voters to say, independent candidates are also equally worthy of being considered. But at the same time, I really would advise independent candidates to possibly start at a local level. So build your way up. I find that perhaps is the best way. Build your way up at a ward level. So running for the local and municipal elections really puts you in a better position so that when you then run for provincial and national, we kind of know what you've done at a local level. But if you're coming out of nowhere, people don't know who you are, people are not really going to vote for you.
So would you describe this basically as a test run then? And was there political will when that act was changed to do it properly?
I do not think so. I do not think there was political will. I think it was just assisting change in that inclusion. So obviously South Africa has big dimensions around inclusion, not leaving people behind, and those kind of analogies. And I'm not sure if it was backed up by a creation of a system and an environment that enables independent candidates to succeed. And I think blanket laws with no system mean absolutely nothing. And this was one of those where, yes, it was, assented to, but what else can you do to support and create an environment for independent candidates to succeed? But also, you're asking political parties to essentially kind of create that environment for their competitors to succeed.
And just to recap on what happened, the court told them that they must do it.
Absolutely. And that's where, I guess, the gap in political will. So if you have courts directing the administrations or parliament to actually enact certain things, you will see a gap in actually implementing those kind of laws because they're being pushed. It's not a decision that they willingly wanted to do.
Yes. So how can civil society, voters, us, the normal people of South Africa, what can we do to support the independent candidates to promote political change also in the electoral system in South Africa?
So for the civil society organizations, I do think that we could advance a lot more in terms of, like I said, voter education. So community engagements around why it's important to vote for independent candidates, why it's important for them to form part of government, and just the value that they bring. But also, it's important for us then as voters to think about the representation that is missing within Parliament. And perhaps independent candidates bring those refreshing perspectives and, narratives that we need that come from our communities, because the reality is these independent candidates come from our communities.
Karabo, thank you so much for joining us here today. That was legal and development practitioner Karabo Okanyane talking to us about the independent candidates in this election. You're watching Week in Review on the SABC News channel, and we will be back right after this. Headlines this hour. The EFF has rejected the ANC's proposal of a government of national unity if it includes the DA and the Freedom Front Plus. President Cyril Ramaphosa says the Eastern Cape floods, which followed heavy rains, have caused damage amounting to about 6 billion rand. And relief operations for people trapped by raging rivers in the Little Karoo region of the Western Cape continue. You are with Week in Review already in progress. Good afternoon and thank you for joining us for the second hour of the show. We are live with you from our studio here in Johannesburg on this winter afternoon. I'm Gustav Freiling and we invite you to be part of the show. You can give us a call on our studio number. It's 011 714 0680 or 0681 or 0682. And during the course of the next hour, we will take your comments on our stories. The EFF has rejected the ANC's proposal of a government of national unity if it includes the DA and the Freedom Front Plus. Julius Malema's Red Berets say they don't want to repeat the government of national unity of 1994. On the other hand, the IFP has committed to further engaging with the ANC and other parties on the formation of a government.
We have already held constructive discussions with a number of parties. The Economic Freedom Fighters, the Inkatha Freedom Party, the Democratic Alliance, the National Freedom Party, the Patriotic Alliance. We've also engaged our alliance partners to brief them on the process and will continue to seek their invaluable views and guidance. The ANC has entered these discussions with an open mind and a commitment to speak to all parties that have a stated intention to advance the interests of the people of South Africa.
The ANC has decided to remain central and not to choose any of the left or right-leaning ideological parties for the formation of a coalition. A government of national unity is the proposal on the table, but there is a bone of contention on the part of the DA and the MK party. The EFF says they want no part in a government that has the DA and Freedom Front Plus.
We are opposed to the government of national unity in as far as it resembles what was concocted in 1994. So if you were to check the outcomes of that government of national unity of Nelson Mandela, it had F.W. de Klerk as an executive deputy president. It had Big Botha as a minister of mineral resources and energy. It had Andre van Niekerk as the minister of land and agriculture. It had some mayor from the National Party as Minister of the Environmental Affairs and Water Affairs. And even he had in social development a minister which came from the apartheid establishment. We do not want to form any part of a government with representatives of the white colonial and apartheid system.
The DA has welcomed the NEC's decision of a formation of a government of national unity, but the party is on the record on their refusal to work with the EFF or any other party that doesn't respect the constitution.
The Democratic Alliance welcomes the fact that negotiations can now proceed into a more substantial phase. Our negotiating team will now embark on a series of further meetings with other parties to establish what their reviews and reactions are to this proposed government of national unity that was announced yesterday by President Ramaphosa. In our upcoming meetings with the ANC, we will also seek further details on what the proposed government of national unity is and how they see it working. In terms of our own internal processes, the Democratic Alliance Federal Executive will then have an engagement on that. And on Monday, the DS Federal Council will be meeting to have further deliberations on this as part of the broader internal process of consultation. We, however, remain committed to the process of trying to find stability for our country.
The IFP has also shown interest in engaging further with the ANC on the formation of the new government.
At our meeting with the ANC on Sunday, 2 June 2024, 3 scenarios were presented: inter alia, a grand coalition, government of national unity, and a minority government. It is abundantly clear that difficult choices and political considerations of material consequences for the country are upon us. Accordingly, the IFP coalition's task team resolved that the ANC must be given space and time to apply its mind and consult further. In light of the announcement made by the ANC last night pronouncing a government of national unity as its preferred option, the IFP coalition's task team will now engage with the ANC and other parties further and report back to the IFP NEC on Monday, 10 June 2024.
The EFF has also called on parties to allow the MK party to get their first preference to form government in KwaZulu-Natal, as they are the majority party in the legislature. Samkele Masego, SABC News, Johannesburg.
ANC politician Zizi Kodwa has resigned as Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture. Kodwa made the announcement shortly after he was formally charged for corruption. Kodwa, along with his co-accused Jehan McKay, appeared in the Johannesburg Specialised Commercial Crimes Court, sitting in Palm Ridge this week. The pair faces corruption charges over alleged bribery to the tune of 1.6 million rand. SABC News senior reporter Kani Mapanga filed this report.
The recommendations of the Zondo Commission are beginning to see light in South Africa's courts. This as the bribery allegations against former Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Zizi Kodwa and businessman Jehan McKay were brought to the fore. The state will allege that during the period from April 2015 to February 2016, when Kodwa was employed as the national spokesperson of the ANC, he allegedly received direct payments and luxury accommodation worth over 1.6 million paid by and or facilitated by McKay as gratifications for his interventions in government procurement processes to advance the interests of McKay.
The charge sheet indicates the amounts that are involved, Your Worship, and the total amount is 1,680,000. And by virtue of that, as well as the fact that the state will be alleging the commission of the offence by common purpose, it is the state's humble submission that the offences preferred against both accused, Your Worship, fall under the ambit of Schedule 5.
The pair applied for bail in the lower court, which ultimately found that the interests of justice permit their release. During his bail application, Kodwa, through his counsel, said that he intends to plead not guilty to the charges.
And I intend pleading not guilty, and I'm determined to attend court on all these dates as directed by the Honorable Court to do so, as I have full faith and confidence in our criminal justice system. I will disclose my version at the appropriate stage during the trial and will take the court into my own confidence.
Shortly after his court appearance, Zizi Kodwa resigned from his ministerial post. This as his court appearance raised questions surrounding the ANC step-aside resolution, which requires one to resign once they are formally charged.
All I can say is that we've noted that the step-aside policy of the ANC will kick in, or shall I say the constitution of the ANC will kick in.
The matter returns to court on the 23rd of July 2024. Kani Mapanga, SABC News, Ekurhuleni.
Judgment has been reserved in the urgent application launched by the expelled founder of the Umkhonto weSizwe Party, Jabulani Khumalo. Khumalo says that the IEC violated Regulation 9 of the registration of political parties when it registered former President Jacob Zuma as the leader of the party ahead of the May polls. He wants the Electoral Court now to order his reinstatement as the party leader on the IEC's records.
The new kid on the block, the Umkhonto weSizwe political party, saw its leadership battle thrust before the Electoral Court just a day after the IEC declared the 2024 national and provincial results. The man who registered the party wants to claim his role as the president of the new formation, arguing that the IEC violated Regulation 9 and acted outside of its powers when it recorded former President Zuma as the leader of the party. Khumalo's counsel elaborated on his version to support this claim.
His version is exactly what he's saying now, which is I've never authorized it. And then perhaps let me then deal with the question of the ultra vires. Mr. Khumalo simply says the changing of the president, the presidential leader, or rather the leader of MK party, was taken improperly. That's what the pleading says. What ultra vires is, you're exercising powers outside of the powers you have. That is what we mean by the unlawfulness of the decision. The IEC has no power to effect that change without the authorization of the leader. And to the extent they do so without that authorization, then the decision is unlawful.
Counsel on behalf of the MK party, however, argued that the Electoral Court lacked jurisdiction, as this was not a decision emanating from an electoral dispute, but rather an internal leadership battle. Counsel added that the contention that the IEC acted outside of its powers was the furthest thing from the truth.
Now, there's nothing that could be further from the truth. You could say the IEC exercises powers improperly and so on, but you can't say it didn't have the powers. Regulation 9, which he read, says exactly that the IEC does have the power if it's instructed by the party leader.
The IEC echoed similar sentiments on the lack of jurisdiction by placing its position clearly to the specialist court, by highlighting that when the Commission registers someone as a party leader, it is not making a legally binding decision.
When the Commission in its record says Mr. De Beer is now the leader of whichever party, it's not declaring that he is the leader and not making a binding decision. It doesn't have a direct external legal effect. And that really means, Justices of the Court, that there's no decision to be reviewed here.
Judgment has been reserved in the matter. Zuma, however, addressed supporters outside the court on the party's results and looming coalition talks, stating that he heard that the ANC wants to go with the DA.
Mina ke ngoba phela nginodlebe kuthiwa akuxatshenwe mayibabo ningathi nizwe ngami ngathi nizwe ngami uyazi into engizwile iyesabisa nenkathi silwela inkuloko sasilwela abacindezeli la kuthiwa umholi wabo ufuna ukuya kule organization okuthiwa Katay wakwayizwa lonto.
The parties have 14 days to take their seats following the declaration. Kenny Mapanga, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, the corruption case against former National Assembly Speaker Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula is set to soon go to trial. She appeared briefly in the Pretoria Magistrates Court on 12 counts of corruption and one of money laundering.
The wheels of justice have been set in motion for the corruption case of former Speaker Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula to head to the High Court for trial. This comes after full disclosure to Mapisa-Nqakula as the accused took place in April, including the list of witnesses that will be called by the state.
Your Worship, the next step then is to
we previously placed on record that the state intends indicting Mrs. Mapisa Ngagula in the High Court and arraigning her for trial there. So now that we have disclosed, the next step is to obtain a High Court date. For that purpose, there are logistics. We need to liaise with the role coordinator in the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. So, Your Worship, if it pleases this court, we have arranged the 9th of July for a High Court date.
Mapisa Ngakula's charges relate to allegations of corruption during her tenure as Minister of Defence. A co-accused was expected to be added to the matter. However, the state did a U-turn during the proceedings, stating that they had now decided to not pursue a second accused.
Well, the investigating directorate decided not to further pursue the co-accused after engaging further with the evidence that was before us. Remember, this person was only going to be charged with one count of money laundering. So after careful consideration, the investigating directorate decided not to pursue this person further.
The matter returns to the lower court on 9 July 2024. Kani Mapanga, SABC News, Pretoria.
Right, for more on this, we are now joined live by political analyst Professor Bheki Mngomezulu. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
Thank you for having me, and good afternoon to your viewers.
So let's talk about all these politicians in the courts. Zizi Kodwa's arrest and resignation over corruption allegations while parties are having coalition talks is rather interesting. What do you make of the timing? And do you think this could have any bearing on the talks the ANC is currently engaging in?
Thank you very much for that question, my brother. The wheels of justice will always grind. Whether we have a funeral or we have a party, it just doesn't matter. So in this case, it could be a coincidence that Honorable or former Honorable Zizi Kodwa had to exit the stage at the time when the ANC was busy trying to put together a team that is going to lead the 7th administration. But then, of course, the question could be asked as to when these cases happened and why are they being activated now. So that is the question that some people will be asking. But from a general perspective, it doesn't really matter that you are in a wedding or in a party or in a funeral. If the law has to grind, it has to grind, regardless of who you are. Unfortunately, this consistency has not been experienced in the country, whereby you find that people are implicated in wrongdoing, but then the manner in which they are being treated is not exactly the same. Zizi Kodwa should be commended for voluntarily resigning before then the ANC could activate the step-aside resolution.
So, despite his arrest and subsequent appearance in court, according to reports, Kodwa could still be sworn in as an MP. Is that something the ANC would want to do, especially as they want to be seen as a party that takes decisive measures against members who have been implicated and charged with corruption? What's your view on that?
It depends on the ANC's definition of renewal. If it is serious about renewal, the way you and I understand what renewal means, then it means that the ANC will have to do things differently. And then, of course, this...
It seems as though we lost your audio. We can't hear him speaking there. Professor Mngomezulu, no, he's speaking and we can't hear him. We lost his audio. So at this point, we're going to try and reconnect with him, but for now, we're going to take a break. This is Week in Review on the SABC News channel, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back. This is Week in Review on the SABC News channel. We were talking to Professor Mngomezulu earlier, but we have a technology problem and we'll be talking to him as soon as we can. In the meantime, we aim to show you this story. Convicted rapist and murderer Tabo Bester has made an impassioned plea for the public to sign a petition for the death sentence to be imposed on him. Addressing the court, he said he felt bad as his co-accused were not at all involved in his escape plot. He appeared alongside 8 other accused for a pre-trial hearing in relation to his alleged aided escape from the Mangaung Correctional Centre back in May 2022. Bester lamented the way he is being treated in prison.
In his emotive address to the court, Bester said he feels there's a special law used specifically on him that hinders his access to defense.
Correctional Service Act 111 of 1998, which I am charged under. I have requested it from the National Commissioner, the Area Commissioner, and it's been refused that I'm being told that I cannot access that document. And that document is actually the document that I'm charged on. I don't know why I'm not allowed to access the document. I've not been given any explanation on that. It took me 4 months to be able to access the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. So what I'm trying to explain to the court is that there are fundamental issues that are pertaining to me as an accused, that I believe that any legal representation that's going to represent me is going to deal with the same issues, and it's going to end up in a point where I'm going to withdraw. This is my third withdrawal of an attorney, and I feel that all of them have had the same challenges. The challenges are that I'm not able to have either access to the documents they want to give me, and the documents are sitting with, because at the current situation is that the National Commissioner has placed me under him directly, meaning that there's nothing that can be processed or given to me without his access or without his direct approval. And in that, it means that whatever document my legal team may present, be it a motion or be it whatever application or any legal documentation, it has to be given to him. And I feel that that is unfair, Your Honor. And also, legal representations are withdrawing from the case based on the fact on how they are treated when they are actually consulting, or how they are treated when they are coming to consult with me.
Bester claims that he's being treated unfairly, as if he's the most dangerous man in prison. He points a finger at high-profile authorities for his alleged ill treatment in prison. He's also complaining about his mental health being compromised due to the 15 months he has been in isolation. Bester alleges that there's a political carnage against him that is affecting his co-accused. Bester is expected to have new legal representation in 7 days.
Let us remember that Tabo Bester is the accused in this matter, and he has no authority to either dictate that the charges against his co-accused must be dropped. That determination has to be done by the presiding officer or by the judge. So he does not have a leg to stand on, he does not have that authority. However, if he's of the view that his co-accused played a minimal role or they did not have anything to do with the case, he must say so during trial.
The court has postponed the matter to also allow other accused to raise funds for legal fees.
Look, among very many other aspects dealing with pre-trial, financial instructions is part of the entire process. I think you'd appreciate the sentiments expressed in court, both for accused number 1 and number 8, that we are all systems go, all hands on deck, ready for action, and we have started the matter, and we'll conclude it to its, or we'll see it. As we will see it to its logical conclusions.
The 9 accused are expected back in court on the 24th of July for yet another pre-trial hearing. Kamogelo Siekwi, SABC News, Bloemfontein.
Right, we sorted out the technology. We're going to speak to the professor soon, but in the meantime, we have a caller on the line. It's Tlaku phoning. Thank you so much for phoning and talking to us. Can you give us your comment about this issue around Zizi Kodwa? Good afternoon, Tlaku.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. You have a comment about our discussion?
Yeah, I've got a comment concerning Zizi Kodwa, the ex-minister, as you say, but to me, he's still a minister in any way.
Yes?
Yeah, the comment is the case is be charged with its own merit. When they talk about the charge of the minister, they must include the government of national unity. That he has got his own merit, how to deal with it. And it will depend from the party or organization later to include him in the government of national unity. At the moment, let them deal with the case separately. We mustn't mix issues here. Thank you very much. That's my comment.
Thank you so much for your comment this afternoon, Tlaku and Gauteng, talking to us about Zizi Kodwa. We continue our conversation with the professor now. Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me at this stage and that you are back on the line. I want to ask you about that comment from the caller, if you were able to hear it. Do you have reaction to that?
It was faint. I couldn't get everything that is said. If you could summarize for me.
But it was about our discussion earlier about him being sworn in as an MP and possibly joining the government of national unity. And the caller said that these two must be held separate cases. The case in the court must be separate from that issue in Parliament.
In principle, he's right that we have to separate them. But the problem is that you are looking at the government, the governing party in the 6th administration, which is about to start the 7th administration, having already taken a resolution that if you are implicated in wrongdoing and you are formally charged, you can then no longer be part of the collective. You step aside immediately. And in this case, as I was saying earlier on, I applaud Zizigoda for voluntarily stepping aside before he could implicate his party and, of course, the country. So that was a good decision. As much as the Constitution says that you are assumed innocent until proven guilty, the fact that the ANC already took a decision that by virtue of you being implicated and therefore being formally charged, you can no longer be serving the country and we can no longer be serving the organization as part of the renewal agenda. And that is the same point I had made earlier on with the Pala matter, where I was saying that if I was advising the president then, I would have advised him to step aside, which is something he did, by the way. He resigned and then members of his party said, you must not resign. What he was doing was correct to say, I don't want to drag my party down. I don't want to drag the image of Parliament and the seat of the president down. I also don't want to drag the country down. So it was, in fact, a noble decision by the president. Unfortunately, those who surrounded him said, must not resign. So Zizigoto has done the right thing. I fully support what he did.
Don't you think that cases such as this one of Kodwa or the delay in charging those implicated in the Zondo Commission report are the reasons why voters decided to punish the ANC?
That is part of the reason. There are many reasons why the ANC was punished. That is just one of the many reasons. And also the other one is inconsistency. If you apply the same law to you and myself, then so be it. But the moment the law is applied differently, then obviously people will be watching that with a keen interest. And the only way they can demonstrate their anger is through their vote. That is exactly what happened. So in this case, I think that the ANC, as the majority party, must do things differently. Lessons should have been drawn from this incident, from this election, and then, of course, going forward to the 2026 local government election and then subsequently the 2029 general election, they must do things differently. But given the trend, the trend of events up to now, I'm doubtful if that will happen. Some of us were already giving warnings as to what was going to happen, but we dismissed people saying that we're prophets of doom. Unfortunately, we've been proved right and they've been proved wrong. Hopefully they will learn from this and do things differently.
So when we now get a new government soon, should we expect more heads to roll? Should we expect the investigative directorate to start taking those implicated in the Zondo Commission report to court? Will that happen?
If we proceed with the government of national unity, I can see more action being taken. The main reason why you could not take action in the 6th administration is simply because the ANC was in the majority in the National Assembly. Even if we invoke Section 89, we invoke Section 100, we invoke any of those sections, Section 102, you are not going to win. We are not going to win simply because the ANC had the majority. This time around is different. If you have a government of national unity, and then you raise a motion of no confidence against the president, for instance, invoking Section 89, chances of you getting a 2/3 majority are much better now than was the case under the 6th administration. So I guess then those who already have issues about the implementation of the recommendations of the Zondo Commission report will then take it up in this 7th administration, and chances are
there will be more sabotage this time around, given that the ANC is a significantly reduced number of seats, and therefore other political parties might then take the matter up. If they come together and then, of course, get a few from the ANC, they are most likely to get the required numbers for you to implement the resolution, the recommendations of the Zondo Commission.
Right, so we are discussing politicians in court and their legal woes, and now we're going to go to the MK party and their court case. The former leader of the Mkhonto weSizwe party is Jabulani Khumalo, and he's contesting the leadership of the party in the electoral court. Now, in May, the IEC stated Khumalo wrote to it on the 9th of April to resign and said Zuma would take over as the leader and as the face of the party. But Khumalo now denies writing a letter to the IEC announcing Zuma as the party's leader and says while Zuma was the face of the party, he remains the leader. How does that work? How do you understand this?
That is very, very interesting indeed. Okay, let's use an analogy here. You are my father, you give me 50 bucks, you say I must go and buy bread. I go to the shop, I buy bread, and then I bring it home. And then when you want to get that bread from me, I say, no, you can't take it. It's my bread, I bought it. You can go to the shop and then ask them to show you cameras. They will show me buying this bread, so it belongs to me. It's very fascinating because this is exactly what is happening here. If indeed it's true that the former President Jacob Zuma was the engine behind the formation of the MK party, but then asked Jabulani Khumalo to register the party to disguise as a decoy. And then Jabulani Khumalo then comes back and says, I am the one who registered the party, therefore it's my party. So it's in that context. It's just like with the ANC, you look at the people who were the signatories when the party was registered. They cannot come back and claim that is their party because they were sent by the organization to go and register the party. Not all of us can endorse our signatures, but it's one person on behalf of the collective. As to how this will pan out, I'm not too sure. But from what Jabulani Khumalo is saying, he is claiming that the letter that was submitted to the IEC was not written by him, and therefore it denies that it was his signature. If he proves that correct, then of course we have a case, a very interesting case to follow. But if indeed it is correct that he wrote the letter, but then he had to make a U-turn somewhere along the line simply because he was influenced from outside or he himself had a change of mind, then of course that will be a different ball game altogether. Let's just watch and see. It's a political chess game that is being played. We'll see who will emerge victorious.
Professor, we have another caller on the line. His name is Leonard. Leonard, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. It's FL Ngwane from Takane Extension 19. I want to weigh in on the Khumalo Zuma issue.
Yes, please.
Yeah, my comment, I want to agree with Professor Mgomezulu that let's allow the court processes to continue and unfold because as matters stand, we are going to regard Zuma as the leader because his face was on the ballot paper. And as a result, I would that nothing can be concluded until the court processes have unfolded and run their course. So as matters stand, Msholozi is the leader of MK, in my opinion, because the matter remains sub judice, and as a result, let everything continue in the court. Then as soon as the matter has been concluded in court, then we shall know where is the truth in terms of the stories that are told on both sides.
Leonard, thank you so much for your call. Leonard from Gauteng. Professor, your comments on that, saying that Jacob Zuma is the leader, no matter what.
Yeah, I think the gentleman from Tsakane is absolutely right. It's just like if you have taken a case to the magistrate's court, you were found guilty, and then you appeal. Of course, the status quo remains. In this case, it's something similar to that. So at the moment, the case is still sub judice, which means then the status quo remains. When the party submitted its list of leaders and members who are going to the different legislatures, provincial and of course national, Zuma was the face of the party and he remained so until the elections. And the status quo remains. So the caller is absolutely right. Until such time that the court makes a ruling to the contrary, then Zuma remains the face and the leader of the MK party. If then the court agrees with Jabulani Khumalo, and then let's say hypothetically speaking, then President Zuma, former President Zuma, then appeals that case. The status quo will still remain until the final decision is made. If it goes to the Constitutional Court, so be it. But until that time, then of course it means that Zuma will remain the face and the leader of the MK party.
I want to ask you something else about the MK party. What happens if they decide to abstain and not to go to that first sitting of Parliament? Will it have any impact with their number of seats there?
I'm glad you are asking that question, because I've heard people saying all sorts of things, and I wonder how they read the Constitution. Section 46 of the Constitution is clear. When you constitute Parliament, you have a minimum of 350 and a maximum of 400. It's as simple as that. In this case, the MK party has 58 seats. You don't have to have done mathematics or math lit to understand that if you subtract 58 from 400, we are not left with 350, we are left with far less than that, 342. So which means, therefore, that you cannot constitute Parliament if the MK party decides not to go to be sworn in the National Assembly. People are saying that all you need is 201. That is a misinterpretation of the Constitution. The 201 rule comes in during elections, that if you are a party or an independent candidate, you must get 50 plus 1. The 50 is the 200 out of 400, and then we have one extra. That is to say that any other party or any other individual that wants to overtake you will not do so, because you have already surpassed the 50% mark. That is where the 201 comes in. Not to say that if you have 201 members in the National Assembly, therefore everything is normal. Not according to Section 46, subsection 1 of the Constitution.
So in terms of the election of the President at that first sitting of Parliament, can they also not go ahead with that?
That one is a very pertinent issue, because if you look at Section 86 of the Constitution, it talks about the election of the President, because procedurally what will happen is that all members of Parliament will be sworn in by Chief Justice Zondo, who will preside over Parliament. Once it's done with that, members have been sworn in, then they will elect a speaker. Then the speaker will take over from Zondo, and Zondo will vacate office. Then the speaker will preside over the election of the president. Once the president is elected, then of course he will appoint his cabinet. In this case, Section 86 does not say anything about the quorum. But then Section 89 about the president being removed from the office is clear. You need a 2/3 majority. The question then becomes, if you have those other members of the National Assembly being sworn in without the MK party, are you constituting Parliament? My answer is no, because Section 46 subsection 1 says you need a minimum of 350. So it means if you have anything less than that, Parliament is not duly constituted. If it is not duly constituted, then where does it derive powers to elect the speaker and elect the president? Even if you don't need a 2/3 majority, you need a simple majority. How then do you account if somebody says you have violated the Constitution because you used a structure that is not duly and formally constituted to elect a speaker and elect the president? That is where lawyers will come in, and I will step aside as a political scientist.
Yes, it's a very interesting argument that we need Solomon's wisdom there in that case. Let's move on to the last politician in the courts that we're talking about this afternoon. And you mentioned the speaker now, the former Speaker of Parliament. She appeared there in the court in Pretoria, 12 counts of corruption and 1 count of money laundering. Her case was now postponed to the 9th of July. Do you see the charges there sticking and a conviction at the end of it all?
It's very hard to say, my brother. It depends. One, who is presiding over the matter. 2, in terms of factional politics in the ANC, which faction does she belong to? I'll be blunt on that. Simply because this factionalism in the ANC, as the governing party, has a ripple effect on what happens to society in general. If you're associated with the quote-unquote right faction, you are safe, regardless of what you do. But if you're associated with the wrong faction, then obviously you are in trouble. In this case, I'm not sure what faction she belongs to. And the other issue maybe that you have to factor in, when she applied for the state to provide a support for her legal fees, that was dismissed. Normally what happens, you look at when the crime was committed. if she committed the crime in her line of duty, ordinarily you need to support her because she committed the crime in her line of duty. But then if she was a minister of defense but committed a crime which had nothing to do with her job, then in that case she's on her own. So the interpretation of all of those things then will tell us on the way forward how the case is being formulated, how the charge sheet has been prepared, what evidence is being brought forth, who is presiding over the matter. Those are some of the many factors that will have to be factored in before a decision is taken. So without us knowing what those details are, it's very hard to say with certainty that she will win or she will not win.
Let me ask you about one of the details of this case. The investigative directorate said in court that they will no longer be pursuing the second suspect in this case. What do you think happened here? Were they quick to make such an announcement before they could properly investigate?
That is very concerning because the fact that someone was a suspect means that you had something against that individual. And then what we need to do then is to go and read it to the court that we had suspect 1 and suspect 2, but we are withdrawing charges against suspect 2 for the following reasons. And those reasons must be recorded so that a few years down the line, if someone wants to come back to the same case, then they must retrieve that information and then establish its authenticity, and then of course establish if indeed the decision that was taken was a correct one or if it was taken haphazardly. So without those details, then of course the decision becomes questionable.
Professor Beki Mngomezulu, thank you so much for joining us. I'm very happy that the technology worked in the end. This is Week in Review on the SABC News channel, and we will be back right after this. Welcome back. This is Week in Review. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has assessed government's response to the devastating floods in the Eastern Cape. He says the floods which followed heavy rains have caused damage amounting to about 6 billion rand. Government has classified the situation in the province as a national disaster in a bid to fast-track relief efforts.
The raging floods have left a trail of destruction in infrastructure in the 2 metros of the Eastern Cape. Kariga, outside Gqeberha, was the hardest hit place, especially in low-lying areas. A total of 11 people lost their lives. Addressing the victims, President Cyril Ramaphosa promised the social welfare departments will assist with burials. Ramaphosa gave government officials 30 days to provide temporary structures for those that were left destitute by the floods.
Make interventions to help them. The Minister of Human Settlements is already started. They are already taking care of accommodating people on a temporary basis, as well as putting up structures on pieces of land that we've identified here to accommodate people. So work is underway. Our disaster response is getting better and better. And I have said that we need to get even much better.
It was a day of mixed emotions for the victims.
They neglected us. They neglected us. They didn't even pay attention. It's only Lapland people. No blankets, no nothing.
See, now my sister's house is moving at the outside. And I'm looking around for the key. I struggle to find the key. And I try to break it open and coming out. And I go to go rescue them, you see. Out of the window, the small boy, get him out of the window, my sister also, and I put him on a safe place.
The Nelson Mandela Metro Municipality has written to Treasury requesting over 150 million rand to assist the victims.
We've got a plan now from the Department of Water and Sanitation to show exactly where the flood line is and the floodplains are, and they will definitely have to be relocated. So I'm in contact with the Minister of Human Settlements, and we will be relocating them within the next 48 hours.
The President says he will be back to assess the progress made in assisting the victims. Dombozuko Palindulo, SABC News, Kariga.
Now, families affected by the floods in the Little Karoo region of the Western Cape are being assisted with aid, including food parcels. The Garden Route District Municipality, the Greater Oudtshoorn Municipality, the Defence Force, the police and other role players are helping with the relief efforts. Heavy rain has resulted in the closure of various roads, including the Meyringspoort Pass that links De Rust with Beaufort West.
some on-the-spot thinking to get food parcels across the Grootrivier. The Van der Walt family and their workers have been cut off since Tuesday. Using a pulley system, they were able to receive necessities for the rest of the week.
So we threw a rope across. The parties on the other side also connected another rope to it, and we made a double line that we actually working on a circulation basis with a push-pull from this side and from the other side, and then we tying the food parcels to that, taking them across to the other side.
The Stompdrift Dam near De Rust has overflowed for the first time in many years. Houses in the Stompies resort close to the dam were flooded. Some residents escaped with only the clothes on their back.
And I walked out of my place. I've got an edge there, stood there, looking at it. It came up very quickly from the time that I'd gone to sleep. And then we decided we'd monitor the water and went inside to have a cup of coffee. Within 10 minutes, we hadn't even finished our coffee and the water started coming into the house. So we had to clamber out the back of the house. We couldn't get out any other way.
Teams are still on high alert to assist families in need.
I want to line out the gift of the givers. They do a lot of work for us, especially with the food for the people that can't go through the rivers to the other side to get in town. Then we've got the SANDF. They help us with trucks, water supply, everything. And then we've got the police, and then the South Cape divers, police divers.
While the heavy rain has caused widespread damage, farmers are also breathing a sigh of relief that a 7-year drought has been broken.
As I've said last year, it's not one good year that cancels 7 dry years, and we're so gladful and grateful for the fact that we're in for a second good year. But besides that, we know that all the dams are full. And the river's running that strong means that we're going to have another 3 years of good expectations for good years in this area.
The N12 between Oudtshoorn and De Rust has been reopened to traffic. No rain is predicted for the area for the coming week. Tanya Krause, SABC News, Little Karoo in the Western Cape.
Motorists got some relief at the pumps this week with fuel prices that dropped on Wednesday. The price of petrol decreased by R1.24 per litre, while diesel went down by R1.18 a litre.
The appreciation of the rand against the US dollar and the decrease in the oil price are the main contributing factors to lower food prices. The slate levy decrease in the structures of petrol and diesel also contributed to the lower prices. Crude oil prices fell from $88 to around $82 per barrel during the period under review.
The main reason for these adjustments are the lower oil prices and stronger rands against the US dollar during the period under review, the lower prices of propane and butane, which reduced the price of LP gas, and the slate levy decreased by 17.54 cents a litre in the price structures of petrol and diesel.
Economists believe the latest lower fuel prices will help keep inflation under control and also alleviate pressure on household budgets.
The lower fuel prices will go some way to facilitate our headline CPI closer to the midpoint of our target band, and it will also alleviate the pressure on household budgets that have been under severe pressure in recent months.
If the current lower international oil prices are sustained, economists expect another drop in fuel prices at the beginning of July. Naledi Matlapeng, SABC News, Johannesburg.
The Public Protector has tasked 3 government departments to get their house in order to effectively deal with gender-based violence. Advocate Koleka Kaleka says the Justice, Social Development and Police departments have inefficient programs to fight GBV. She released her report into government ineffectiveness in dealing with GBV after she investigated 38 magistrates' courts across the country.
28-year-old Altisha Korke died at the hands of her jealous partner. Her 7-year-old daughter, Rainisha, was also drowned in a bathtub by her father, Ryan Smith. This was just 4 days after she tried to get a protection order against her jealous boyfriend at this court. The tedious process to make a protection order application prompted her to abandon the process. Galeka wants the Justice Department to conduct an audit of its infrastructure, streamline the application process, and use all languages.
The audit should include short and medium to long-term needs of the various courts, that within 210 calendar days of the date of the final report, in line with Section 195, 1B of the Constitution, which states that efficient, economic, and effective use of resources must be promoted. Submit to the Public Protector a detailed project plan for the construction, renovation, and procurement of all courts identified in the audit with clear dates, turnaround times.
And the Public Protector also wants swift action on protection orders.
Some courts were dealing with protection order on a daily basis, and other courts set aside 1 day in a week to deal with applications for protection orders. This is contrary to Section 5.1 of the Domestic Violence Act, which requires the court to consider an application that is submitted to it as soon as is reasonably possible and prejudices the victims or applicants, as it may expose them to further violence or death if protection order applications are not dealt with timely.
The Justice Department has welcomed the Public Protector's findings, saying it will comply with the remedial action.
I wanted to get an outsider to investigate, to basically somebody who, so there couldn't be allegations that there was favoritism. So that was the reason for approaching the Public Protector. It then since grew into this broader investigation.
The Korke family was also present when the findings were released.
So no, onze toestemming het hulle nou 'n movie ook gemaak en op die TV gesit.
He says without their permission, they also made a movie and put it on TV, and that they didn't give permission. Meanwhile, the investigation has opened up another probe by the Public Protector.
Today, we also launch a systemic investigation into the administrative deficiencies relating to the handling and processing of applications of child maintenance.
The Public Protector has given the Department of Social Development, the Department of Justice, as well as the South African Police 210 days to respond to her report. The three entities must come up with implementation plans to better resource the courts, train police, as well as build more Tutuzela care centers in order to respond to the plight of GBV survivors. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Cape Town.
And that is where we leave it for today. Join us tomorrow when we'll be looking at the week ahead. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday afternoon. The news continues at the top of the hour. Goodbye.